chance, away with pomp and circumstance. Come join our merry dance to the rhythm of goodbye. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the king of nothing really. Wave of a hand and a life of Riley. Pot Nazi, pot King Billy. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the dear old mum, mummified on gin and rum. Smile and wave and just play dumb. Goodbye to the crown. Farewell the jewel crown, farewell the velvet gown. Watch it all come tumbling down. Goodbye to the crown. Goodbye to the crown.
Hello there and welcome to The Monarchy, episode 102 here on Press TV. I'm Samson Sees, and we are still giving you the alternative stories about the one and only UK. What you see and hear on this show is the material that corporate television networks do not want you to see. Take British Prime Minister David Cameron's speech at the UN, for example. The UK now seeks to attack the ISIL Takfiri militants in Iraq and Syria. Are these not the same militants that are coming from the UK? Here are some hints. An ISIL executioner with his London accent, Finsbury Park Mosque, a female British citizen wanting to be the first woman to cut the throat of an American or a Brit. Cameron certainly has a lot on his plate these days, because a Tory MP defected to the rival party UKIP, which is on the rise as we speak. Could this be the beginning of the end for the Conservatives? Let's find out. Speaking at the UN in New York, the British Prime Minister has once again turned the gathering to a circus of lies. It would be no overstatement to describe his speech as ominous, although you had to read between the lines to find the sinister subtext.
Once again, the British Prime Minister David Cameron has shamelessly turned the United Nations General Assembly rostrum into a scene of a bitter comedy about hypocrisy and telling lies. Historically, British politicians are well known for preaching opposite to what they have in their mind. But Cameron's outrageous closing speech at the 69th session of the UNGA has indeed guaranteed him a place on top of the list of hypocrite British politicians ever appeared in the United Nations. Mentioning ISIL terrorism threat, Ukraine crisis, and even the spread of the Ebola virus in West Africa, he tried in a shamming manner to portray Britain as a patron of peace and stability and the supporter of the oppressed nations around the globe, particularly in the Middle East.
Madam Vice President, this year we face extraordinary tests of our values and our resolve. In responding to the aggression against one of our member states, the Ukraine, in seeking peace in the Middle East, in dealing with the terrifying spread of the Ebola virus in West Africa, and in overcoming what I want to focus on today, which is the mortal threat we all face from the rise of ISIL in Syria and Iraq.
He should have reached the highest level of confidence, deep-rooted in stupidity, when he was talking about what he called the mortal threat the world faces from the rise of ISIL in Syria and Iraq. He easily ignored his respective government's negative role in forming, organising, supporting, and even praising the demon that Britain and the United States have created.
We recognise that the so-called rebels who back those views also deserve our support in terms of training and assistance and advice, because the truth is this: we won't get a peace process in Syria unless President Assad realises that actually his regime is under some sort of pressure, some sort of threat.
Last year, shortly before Cameron's speech in the UNGA, Takfiri terrorists in Syria shot a 10-month-old infant called Massa Shabuk in his uncle's arms, along with 4 other people, only because the baby was crying. Just days before that, the so-called freedom fighters who Cameron was defending in the UNGA session hanged a 3-year-old boy, the last survivor of a Syrian family, simply because he was from a Shia family. Instead of condemning such brutality, Cameron even praised Takfiris, labelling them as freedom fighters while speaking at the UN. These were mad dogs that the coalition government was providing them with weapons and intelligence. For more than 3 years, news of beheadings, slaughtering, rapes, flesh-eating and almost any barbaric act imaginable were the main theme of the news about Syria on a daily basis, and Cameron and his morally degraded colleagues were proudly announcing their commitment to support the terrorists. This year, British government changes colour in an even more ridiculous performance. Cameron sheds crocodile tears for the Al-Shaitat tribe in Deir al-Zor in eastern Syria.
Al-Zor is a province in eastern Syria, home to the Al-Shaitat tribe. It was captured by ISIL last month. 700 tribesmen were executed, many were beheaded. The vast majority were civilians, Muslims, who refused to take an oath of allegiance to ISIL's sick extremist worldview, and who paid for this with their lives. They are not alone. Across Syria and northern Iraq, thousands have suffered the same fate. Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, Christians, Yazidis, people of every faith and none.
Did Cameron's conscience wake now after 3 years of bloodshed, rape, murder and barbaric actions of long-bearded monsters?
The cause of this terrorist threat is a poisonous ideology of Islamist extremism. Islamist extremism believes in using the most brutal forms of terrorism to force people to accept a warped worldview and to live in a quasi-medieval state. To defeat ISIL and organizations like it, we must defeat this ideology in all its forms. As evidence emerges about the backgrounds of those convicted of terrorist offences, it is clear that many of them were initially influenced by preachers who claim not to encourage violence, but whose worldview can be used as a justification for it.
It is so ridiculous and so conceited of Cameron labelling ISIL views as sick extremist worldviews, while his coalition government is collaborating with backward Saudi regime in openly arming and providing military training for murderous mad dogs committing mayhem and terror both in Iraq and Syria. He argues that the world should defeat the ideology of extremism that is the root cause of this terrorism. He may be right, but arrogantly discounts the role of Britain in the formation of the backward, poisonous Wahhabi ideology and the role of consecutive British governments in supporting and backing the Al Saud rule on Arabian Peninsula since the 19th century. It is an undeniable fact that Saudi Arabia has been complicit in the takeover of much of northern Iraq and Syria by ISIL terrorists, while fueling the flames of the Shia-Sunni conflict in the Middle East and across the Islamic world. Saudi sympathy for Takfiri militancy is now based on concrete facts.
As we know, this type of ideology has been sponsored for at least 100 years, if not 200 years. It's something that has been spreading across the world, funded by petrodollars, and they haven't done anything to stop it. We know that they're funding their madrasas around the world. It's getting out of hand. They are keeping silent. They're not doing anything about it. So we want an answer for them.
Now we're standing here to shout at Saudi Arabia, to tell them to stop funding these people. And we also want to get through to the British government, who has an alliance with the Saudi Arabian government. Now, why is the British government not doing anything about this? Why are they not stopping Saudi Arabia when they're so good in their connections together?
Our enemy's enemy.
In Cameron's circus at the UNGA, there was not even a mention of Saudi autocrats or Qatari petty kings who are racing in propagation of Takfiri ideology across the world. Instead, Cameron tried to divert attention from the main roots, pointing fingers at Iran.
ISIL is a threat to us all, but the greatest threat is to the region. It is very welcome that a number of Arab countries have already taken part in the action to degrade ISIL. They have shown courage and leadership. Iran should also be given the chance to show it can be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Part of the problem? Iran is the country which has been actively fighting in the forefront against ISIL during the past 2 years.
ما به عنوان دولت جمهوری اسلامی ایران این خشونت‌ها را تحمل نخواهیم کرد، این ترورها را تحمل نخواهیم کرد و به نوبه خود همونطور که در سازمان ملل ما اعلام کردیم ما با خشونت و افراد و تروریسم در منطقه و جهان می جنگیم و مبارزه می کنیم.
امروز اونها چند مزدور رو اجیر بکنن، عده‌ای از مزدوران خودشون رو در درون جهان اسلام فعال بکنن تا به زعم خودشون اینها با رفتارهای تروریستی بتواند جهان اسلام رو مشغول به خودش بکنن، یک نقشه نخنما و پوسیده و قدیمی است. میخواهند انتقام شکستشون در سوریه رو در نقطه دیگر بگیرن. ان شاء الله به برکت قرآن و اهل بیت در عراق شکستی خواهند خورد که دیگر در هیچ جای دیگر چنین فتنه ای رو نتوانند دنبال کنند.
Instead of joining the alliance formed to fight the same group they all joined years ago to fund and train, Iran now does not dance to the tune of the West in attacking Syria's legitimate government. How could Mr. Prime Minister expect Iran to join US allies and help them kill the monster they created and funded and are even still supporting?
This ideology.
Iran has already mocked hollow and biased claims about confronting ISIL and plans to eliminate Takfiris in Iraq and Syria.
من این چند روزه تفریحی داشتم این 2-3 روز آخر و اون تفریح عبارت از این بود که گوش میکردم به حرفای آمریکایی ها در زمینه داعش و مبارزه با داعش و حرفایی که میزنن، حرفای پوچ و توخالی و جهتدار. از جمله اون چیزهایی که من رو برای من واقعا مایه تفریح بود این بود که دیدم هم وزیر خارجه آمریکا، همون دختره سخنگوشون که میاد وای میسته اونجا حرف میزنه، اینا صریحاً گفتن که ما از ایران برای ائتلاف علیه داعش دعوت نمی کنیم. اولا چه افتخاری بالاتر از این برای ما که آمریکا در یک کار دست جمعی از ما مایوس باشه، در یک کار خلاف غلطی که دارن انجام میدن نخواد که ما باشیم. این برای ما مایه افتخار، مایه تأسف نیست. این اولا. ثانیاً دیدم همشون دروغ میگن، برای خاطر اینکه همون روزهای اولی که مسئله داعش در عراق پیش آمد آمریکایی ها به وسیله سفیرشون از سفیر ما در عراق درخواست کردند که شما بیایید بنشینیم درباره داعش با هم هماهنگی کنیم. سفیر ما این رو منعکس کرد. بعضی از مسئولین ما هم حرفی نداشتن. من مخالفت کردم، گفتم توی این قضیه ما به خصوص با آمریکا همراهی نمی کنیم، چون اینا خودشون دستشون آلوده است و توی این قضیه ما چطور بیاییم با کسانی که دستشون آلوده است، نیتشون آلوده است، چطور همکاری کنیم. اینها قبل از این یک ائتلافی علیه سوریه تشکیل دادن با سر و صدای فراوان در اطراف عالم. 30 کشور، 40 کشور، 50 کشور جمع کردن، هیچ غلطی نتونستن بکنن در مورد سوریه. در مورد عراق هم همینه، نمیخوانم کار جدی بکنن. اون حرکتی که علیه داعش انجام گرفت و کمر داعش رو در عراق شکست، این کار آمریکایی ها نبود. خود اونا هم خوب میدونن، داعشی هم خوب میدونن، مردم عراق هم خوب میدونن کار مردم عراق بود، کار ارتش عراق بود، کار نیروهای مردمی بود که به خوبی یاد گرفته بودن چجوری باید با داعش مبارزه کنن و مبارزه کردن و تا اینجا ضربه های جدی رو وارد کردن. بعد از این هم ضربه رو اینها وارد خواهند کرد، حالا خواهند دید.
While he was accusing Iranian officials of not hearing the voice of the masses with a specious pose and a cold face, many Iranians should have had a strange feeling of surprise mixed with repulsion and derision. Cameron should have forgotten that his cabinet is the fruit of the 2010 disgraceful election and the result of Britain's ailing voting system. It was last year that this very same man, at the very same place, admitted that in non-democratic societies, the rule of law is twisted for the benefit of the law. Doesn't this description of an undemocratic society suit exactly the British political system? The laws easily change for the benefit of the elite, and even some foreign countries simply because they have the money to bribe the British officials. Can anyone deny that members of the royal family, businessmen and bankers, Israeli criminals, Arab autocrats, and many more have enjoyed such twists of law? Has he forgotten the scandalous red tactics against Scottish independence camp? By appealing to all the old folks, the old money, the old power brokers throughout Scottish society, and all the old established institutions of Scotland, which are inextricably entangled with all things having to do with English banking, Cameron could avert breakup of the old fox, for now. Cameron ends his shameful speech with these words.
My message today is simple. We are facing an evil against which the whole of the world should unite. And as ever, in the cause of freedom, democracy and justice, Britain will play its part. Thank you.
It is not clear how much more the world should watch this ridiculous performance by the British warmongers.
One of the unwritten laws in British politics is that insurgent parties can never thrive. Writing in the 1950s, the French political scientist Maurice Duverger observed that majoritarian systems such as that of Britain tend to produce a strong two-party system that leaves little room for challengers. But in recent years, and as Britain's system has become more fragmented and less predictable, Duverger's law has seemed increasingly outdated.
The Conservative Party is in a state of deep uncertainty. British PM David Cameron was plunged into a chain of crisis after one of his ministers resigned over a sex scandal and 2 other MPs defected to UKIP. As the Prime Minister sent RAF fighter planes into action over Iraq, domestic troubles inside his own party dramatically punctured the optimism among Tory delegates as they headed to Birmingham for their last annual gathering before next year's general election. On the eve of the Conservative Party's annual conference, Brooks Newmark quit as the Minister for Civil Society after he was caught sending an explicit photograph of himself to someone he believed was a woman over the internet. The resignation came hours after Mark Reckless, the MP for Rochester and Strood, announced on television that he was defecting to the UK Independence Party. Blaming Cameron directly, Reckless said the Conservative leadership was part of the problem that is holding our country back. Mr. Reckless's move, just 1 month after former Tory MP Douglas Carswell also defected to UKIP, sent reverberations around the Conservative Party. Mr. Carswell, who was MP for Clacton, also stepped down from his role, sparking a by-election, which has been scheduled for the 9th of October. He is running for the same seat under his new party and is odds-on favourite. Currently, about 2/3 of UKIP voters supported the Conservatives in 2010, although before 2010 many say they voted Labour. Senior Tory strategists assume that most of these voters will return to the fold in May, but the disadvantaged profile of these voters points in another direction. These are voters who were struggling long before the financial crisis, will not have felt the economic recovery, and may conclude that their prospects are better served with UKIP's Nigel Farage or by staying at home. Up to now, UKIP has been seen as the biggest threat to the Conservatives, but it believes it now poses as big a challenge to Labour. Nigel Farage has issued a pre-election warning to Ed Miliband that UKIP is targeting voters in Labour's traditional heartlands. Speaking at UKIP's annual conference in Doncaster, where the Labour leader is an MP, he said, "It's no coincidence that we're holding our conference here. We are now parking our tanks on the Labour Party's lawn." He said the Eurosceptic Party was tearing vast chunks out of the Labour vote in the north of England and Wales. A new ComRes poll for ITV News suggests that 1/3 of voters in 40 marginal seats would consider voting for UKIP at the next general election, but over half said they would next cast their ballots for the Eurosceptic Party. In addition, another Survation poll has put UKIP support at the next general election on 23%, as mere 7 points behind the Conservatives, and just 11 behind the Labour Party.
If we win, it will be absolutely dramatic. The phrase that Nigel Farage used was a Krakatoa moment to follow his earthquake in the European elections. That is why so much effort has been thrown in by the Conservatives. That's why the Prime Minister has been here 4 times. That's why the streets are crowded with Conservative MPs and ministers. It will be enormous.
The chain disasters for Cameron mean the Tories met amid a sense of crisis over the threat posed by UKIP and Sleaze, just at the time when they had hoped to unite and turn their fire on Labour. UKIP is already growing at an extraordinary pace and among specific groups. Before 2010, the party was an amateurish and poorly disciplined pressure group. Since then, it has risen steadily in the polls to average 14%, well ahead of the traditional third party, the Liberal Democrats, and about twice the level that it needs to have a serious impact on the outcome in 2015. Its membership has risen to 38,000, at a time when party memberships are falling. It has attracted a credible Conservative Party defector, and almost certainly its first elected MP in Douglas Carswell, and in May UKIP won the European Parliament elections after polling more than 4 million votes. It was the first nationwide victory for a new party since Ramsay MacDonald led Labour to general election success in 1929. UKIP has achieved all of this with no more than 20 full-time staff.
UKIP is a hard-right reactionary party that preys on people's insecurity, but it is not a fascist organisation like the BNP. Much of UKIP's appeal comes from exploiting a widespread of anti-establishment mood, people who are disgruntled and alienated with all of the main Westminster parties. And that's all she wrote, for this edition anyway. But it doesn't stop there. You can continue to discuss the issues with us on Facebook. Our page is named UK Desk Press TV. Or you could email us at britain@presstv.ir, whatever suits you best. You've been watching The Monarchy, and The Monarchy has been watching Britain. Until next week, stay well, stay safe, and goodbye from me and the team.
Someone, my lord, your time has come right between the eyes. Felled his master not by chance, away with pomp and circumstance. Come join our merry dance to the